In the previous video in the series about grammar, we saw that for a linguist, grammar is a bit more complex than what we learn in school. But why? Grammar is complicated enough. Let's talk about why traditional grammar is not a good tool for linguists to understand language fully. Hi, welcome to Snap Language. I'm Marc Franco. When we talk about grammar, we understand it as a set of rules that speakers use to put words together to produce sentences that others can understand. So an ungrammatical sentence is one that's impossible in a language. This sentence, "The boy chased the dog," is grammatical in English. So is "The dog chased the boy." Chase dog boy is ambiguous at best. The grammatical structure in an English sentence like that is that the something or someone placed before the verb is the subject, or the one acting on what comes after the verb. That's the object of the verb. In chase dog boy, you're putting these words together in a way that violates the basic structure of English, subject, verb, object. So the sentence is ungrammatical. A verb, subject, object, word order is possible in some languages, but not in English. Then what if someone says, "You ain't done nothin'"? Traditional grammar will tell you that this sentence is ungrammatical. However, you understand what the speaker means, right? In a linguistic analysis, the word order is fine, subject, verb, object. So what's the problem? In standard English grammar, you shouldn't use ain't for have not, nor should you use a double negative, so not done nothing is considered ungrammatical. But many people say that, and you understand what they mean.
You ain't done nothing. You know what I'm saying?
In other words, there is an underlying grammar in this sentence from a linguistic perspective. For many English speakers, ain't is just another contraction, and double negatives are fine.
And I ain't never done nothing like this before.
In fact, many other languages have double negatives in their standard grammars. When you say it's ungrammatical, wrong, or bad English, you're using standard grammar rules to judge the speaker. You should take a look at the video addressing stereotyped perceptions. The link's in the description. Notice that for a linguist, an ungrammatical sentence means that it violates the grammar rules shared in a linguistic community. It doesn't matter what the rules are. It's an impossible sentence. For a traditional grammarian, an ungrammatical sentence means it doesn't conform to the rules they decided speakers should follow. It doesn't matter how people actually use the language. Wait, before you go leave an angry comment in defense of good grammar and proper English, let me make something clear. Traditional grammar is useful to create a standard that everyone can follow. In a situation where, for example, you're writing an academic paper, you want to make sure that your language use will be as clear as possible. You want to make sure your readers share the same rules so there's no ambiguity. But if someone uses non-standard grammar on Twitter, oh, relax. Traditional grammar dates back to some 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece and India. Around 100 BCE, the Alexandrians developed Greek grammar to preserve the purity of the language. Dionysius Thrax wrote a treatise called The Art of Grammar, where, among other things, it described parts of speech in Greek, pronouns, verbs, prepositions, and so forth. This analytical study of language was rooted in the idea that good language should reflect the prestige of good literature, philosophy, rhetoric, and science. This early work by the Greek influenced Roman scholars who adapted it to Latin. As grammar evolved over time, It kept its focus on formal literary language. We can still see this influence today. Grammar was seen as a way to prevent language from degenerating. Some people still see it that way. This approach to grammar is known as prescriptive. That is, grammar is supposed to tell you how you must use the language. For a linguist, analyzing the language includes all of its varieties, not just the literary or prestige language variety. This is known as the descriptive approach to understanding grammar. Without passing judgment, a linguist observes a linguistic phenomenon and tries to understand it using tools available in linguistics. So back to you ain't done nuttin'. It has an underlying grammar structure and it makes sense. When you say, but this is bad English, well, you're judging it as bad according to the rules of prescriptive, standard English grammar. If you want to follow the ancient tradition of Greek and Roman grammarians, there are rules you must follow in formal, written, and literary English. But this approach does not explain language use in informal, spoken, everyday English. You could say standard grammar creates consistency in the use of language. For example, we know that sentences in English must have a subject and a verb, and the verb sometimes calls for an object, and so forth. Okay, that makes sense. In chase the dog, you're left wondering who did the chasing, right? So are these sentences grammatical? Can you help me? Sorry, busy today. Here you have a subject and a verb with an object. How about this sentence? No subject, no verb. But wait, are you left wondering who's sorry? Of course not. You know the speaker's sorry, and you know the speaker means, I am busy today. You even understand the speaker saying, I cannot help you because I'm busy today. In formal writing, you'd need a complete sentence like, I am busy today, therefore I cannot help you. In everyday spoken language, sorry, busy today communicates the message just fine. By the way, like, share, subscribe. See? Communication without complete sentences. In an interrogative sentence, you must place the verb or an auxiliary verb before the subject. How did you like the cookies I gave you? Delicious. You ate them all? Here you have the auxiliary verb before the subject to ask a question. Great. But here, well, the subject is not after the verb, but it's still an interrogative sentence. Perfectly fine. You do that in English when your question is actually asking someone to confirm information. How about those made-up rules? Thou shalt not split infinitives in English.
These changes have the potential to greatly improve regulatory outcomes.
To boldly go where no probe has gone before.
Or never end a sentence with a preposition. Why not?
Last question from me for now. What are 3 apps that you can't live without?
How would you say that according to standard grammar? What are 3 apps without which you cannot live? In spoken language? No, I don't think so. Mind you, a lot of these weird prescriptive grammar rules can be traced back to the old analysis of language based on Greek or Latin. For example, it's impossible to split an infinitive in Latin. An English infinitive has 2 words, to and go. In Latin, to go is ire. There's nothing to split. So over time, European grammarians try to fit the rules of Latin and Greek into English. We ended up with these rules that don't really make much sense, so speakers just ignore them. In fact, the more different the standard is from the way people actually use the language, the less likely it is they'll pay much attention to the standard. So, in that sense, Standard grammar is supposed to create consistency, but sometimes it ends up causing more trouble than it's actually worth. And now, a word from our sponsor. Okay, back to work. Again, there's nothing wrong with having a standard grammar, but remember that we adjust how we use the language depending on the social situation. If you're writing a formal essay and you want to use who and whom, go nuts. If you're talking to your friends about a party you're going to and someone says, "Who are you going with?" would it bother you? Would you expect them to say, "Whom are you going with?" Oh, wait. Whom, and you can't end a sentence with a preposition. With whom are you going? Over time, there's less and less people who pay attention to Over time, there are fewer and fewer people who pay attention to the distinction between who and whom, and certainly no one cares if you end a sentence with a preposition. These rules are sorely outdated, and especially in an informal context, well, they just don't belong there. Language changes. Like it or not, language evolves. Grammarians eventually come to accept these changes and incorporate them into the grammar as the new standard. But language changes fairly quickly, while traditional grammar moves at a snail's pace. I'm in no way implying that we should just forget about grammar altogether. It's just that grammar has different definitions for grammarians and linguists. If you need a standard to follow, standard grammar is the way to go. It's just a tool, but it creates problems when it's used as kind of a weapon, when it triggers stereotyped perceptions. Watch that video. For a linguist, grammar is a linguistic phenomenon. The members of any linguistic community share a complex system of rules that governs how sentences are put together, period. For a linguist, grammar is a feature of the language. For a grammarian, grammar's a tool that prescribes one way to apply that naturally occurring grammar. But wait, aren't you a linguist? Aren't you a fan of descriptive grammar? Ugh, descriptivists. No, standard grammar's fine. What? So you want to preserve the purity of the language? That's so elitist. This is a great segue into one of the topics in the series, the so-called feud between prescriptivists and descriptivists. That's a fine needle to thread, so first we'll talk about when standard grammar goes awry. It should be a fun video before we get into something that's a bit more controversial. There ain't no better time than now to like and share this video with other language lovers. And be sure you hit the bell button when you subscribed. This way you'll get all notifications about new videos. Thanks for stopping by and watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.